Howdy, y'all. It's Juliet Necro, and I'm the video game babe. I'm the one who wins. Like all trans women, the Sonic franchise was a formative work for me. I apologize to all trans women to whom Sonic has no significance. That was a joke. As I mentioned in my Chrono Trigger video, I was a Nintendo baby to the core when I was a girl. I'm too young to remember the Super Nintendo and Genesis war of the early 90s, but I absorbed a bit of the animosity towards Sega and Sonic from it. 4-year-old Juliet considered Sonic the enemy. In her mind, he was her hero Mario's greatest foe. At least, she did when she wasn't too hyper-fixated on Thomas the Tank Engine to focus on anything else. I'm just now realizing that as a child, I eventually exchanged Thomas for Sonic. I upgraded to a new fast blue thing. Anyway, like many Nintendo kids, my first exposure to the Sonic series was on the GameCube, after Sega gave up the ghost on hardware and became a third-party publisher. My brother and I didn't get our GameCube until Christmas 2002, when the console had already been out for a year, and for that entire year, 5- and 6-year-old Juliet was aware of it and excited for it. I wasn't in kindergarten until fall of 2002, so before that it was either preschool or being at home. My dad worked, and my older brother was at school, so since it was just me and my mom at home, she often brought me with her on errands. My favorite errand was Target runs, because I could always spend a few minutes playing GameCube on the little demo kiosk in the electronics section. I loved getting the chance to play a bit of Mario Sunshine or Super Smash Bros. Melee on those kiosks. I mean, for crying out loud, Melee had Ness as a default character. My dumb 5-year-old self wasn't good enough to unlock Ness in Smash 64. Clearly this new game was the answer to all of my problems. Eventually, though, my mom brought me along on a Target run, and naturally I got her to let me stay at the GameCube kiosk for a few minutes as soon as we passed the electronics section. But when I grabbed the controller, it wasn't Smash Bros. Melee or Mario Sunshine waiting for me. It was Sonic Adventure 2 Battle. What a betrayal! Sonic was the enemy, and here he was showing up on my beloved Nintendo hardware? I located a Target employee, and asked him in a polite 5- or 6-year-old way if he could put Melee on the demo kiosk instead. Credit to that Target employee. I'm sure that he had absolutely no control over what game was available to try on that kiosk, but he nicely encouraged me to try this new game instead. Skeptically, I began. Naturally, the first thing I saw was the opening scene of City Escape, where Sonic essentially snowboards down the hilly streets of Totally Not San Francisco, accompanied by one of the all-time bangers in the history of video game soundtracks. Needless to say, for the rest of my elementary school life, Sonic was a core part of my being. I don't know how someone could play City Escape at that impressionable age and not have it become their entire personality. And it also didn't help that some of my earliest friendships influenced it. I distinctly remember going to my elementary school in early August to meet my first grade teacher and see her classroom. There was another kid with his mom there, and our mom started making small talk. I remember one of our moms, I can't remember which, mentioning that their kid was a big Sonic fan. Both I and this boy heard that, and our eyes met. From that moment, we were best friends for most of elementary school. Sonic was a centerpiece of our cafeteria and recess conversations for years up until middle school, and even occasionally beyond. He actually texted me after seeing the Sonic movie in the theater, and told me that it made him nostalgic. It was delightful to hear from him again, and I felt the same way. Luckily, the GameCube era was a great time to be a young Sonic fan. The first Sonic game on GameCube was Sonic Adventure 2 Battle, of course, but they followed it up by releasing Sonic Adventure DX and Sonic Mega Collection to make the backlog available to the Nintendo kids like me who had never tried those games on Sega hardware. They even included a bunch of Game Gear games in Sonic DX for extra completeness. Later on, they also released a bunch of the weird stuff on Sonic Gems Collection. Even though I never had Sega hardware, I had the opportunity to try nearly every game in the franchise on my GameCube, barring the truly out there stuff like Knuckles Chaotix. Also, yes, I know it's supposed to be a Sonic Adventure Deluxe, but I've been calling it either Sonic Adventure DX or even just Sonic DX ever since I was 7. Leave me alone. The Sonic Adventure games especially were very formative to me. Obviously, I've already said many words about Sonic Adventure 2's influence. It was one of the first games I ever played that wasn't from Nintendo, aside from stuff like the humongous entertainment games I played as a really little kid, or the Thomas the Tank Engine Super Nintendo game. I could probably recite most of the cutscenes by heart if I wanted. Hey, that's That blue hedgehog again of all places. I found you. Faker. Faker? I think you're the fake hedgehog around here. You're comparing yourself to me? Ha! You're not even good enough to be my I'll make you eat those words! The adventure games were certainly popular in their day. Both of them were in the GameCube's Player's Choice collection, and both received high scores at the time. Recent opinions have been a bit more divided. I've often heard it repeated that there's never been a good 3D Sonic game. As someone whose first Sonic game was a 3D Sonic game, this has never quite sat right with me. Despite everything, I still like the Sonic Adventure games, and I'd like to show them to you and give you my very biased perspective. I think a lot of the discourse surrounding the adventure games comes from either people older than me who grew up with the Genesis games and were disappointed in all or most of the 3D games, or people younger than me who started with the 2D games or with the Boost games and don't understand the appeal of these two. So let me contribute why I still love these games, even as I acknowledge their flaws. Even though I played Sonic Adventure 2 first, we ought to begin with Sonic Adventure DX. Almost everything I say will be relevant to both versions, but I'll be using the DX version for this video. I know that a lot of people prefer the visuals of the Dreamcast version, and I absolutely understand where they're coming from. The Dreamcast version has different character models and a lot of different textures than the DX version, which makes its visuals distinct. However, I'm going with the look of the DX version for two reasons. For one, it's the version I know. Like I said, I was a Nintendo girl, so I never touched a Dreamcast until college, and I didn't even play Sonic on it. I played Marvel vs. Capcom 2 and Power Stone. When I picture Sonic Adventure 1 in my mind's eye, I see the Sonic DX version because that was the one I played at a young age. Secondly, the version of Sonic Adventure on Steam, which I'll be using for this review, is the DX version. There are fan mods to emulate the look of the Dreamcast original, or even provide a fusion between the good points of both, but Sega seems to have no interest in providing a way to see the 1999 version of the game without some work on the player's end. The original Sonic Adventure is one of those games that's essentially out of print in favor of its remaster, which is a real shame for people who prefer the Dreamcast visuals. If I were to describe Sonic Adventure in a single word, it would be ambitious. This game had a lot to prove when it was released as a launch title for the Dreamcast. Sonic famously sat out the Saturn generation due to the infamous cancellation of Sonic Extreme, so this was in many ways a franchise reboot to coincide with the launch of the new hardware. The character designs even got redone. As I've said many times already, I started with 3D Sonic, so modern Sonic as he's called now has always looked just as correct to me as classic Sonic. I like the stage we're at now where people are more or less comfortable to let modern and classic Sonic exist alongside each other. Anyway, like I said, there is a lot of ambition in the design of Sonic Adventure. It has 6 playable characters, more than any other previous mainline Sonic game, each of whose gameplay is much different than the characters in the 2D games. Sonic runs and jumps through his stages to reach the goal as fast as possible. Tails does the same but races against an AI-controlled opponent. Knuckles searches his stages for the pieces of the Master Emerald. Amy evades a robot that persistently pursues her. E102 Gamma has a lock-on mechanic and has to destroy enemies to extend his ever downward-ticking timer. Big the Cat goes fishing. We'll get to Big. There are a lot of cutscenes in this game, and a very involved story for a series that started out as 2D platformers. There's a lot of voice acting for a 1999 game here as well. Not all of it is good, although from what I've heard, a lot of that can be attributed to poor direction more than anything else. This was long before the days of Giancarlo Esposito, showing up to be the only thing anyone remembers about the Far Cry game he was in. Also, Big the Cat is voiced by goddarn Duke Nukem John St. John. If I had money to throw around, I would consider hiring Johnny Matrograno to read Big's lines for this video. Oh well, maybe someday. Not only are there 6 playable characters, there's a lot of other stuff going on too. There's 2 different Star Fox or Panzer Dragoon-esque flying levels which kinda suck. There's snowboarding, there's sandboarding, there's a twinkle circuit, there's adventure fields. Every character except Big has at least one unique boss fight, and of course, there's chow raising. The adventure fields are one of the ways that this game shows its ambition. All the previous Sonics had you going straight from level to level in an unbroken chain. Sonic 3 even made a point of sometimes connecting one zone to another through little cutscenes. Instead, Sonic Adventure features hubs from which the levels are accessed. There are 3 separate ones: the city station square, the Mystic Ruins, and the Egg Carrier. I'm of 2 minds about the adventure fields. For one thing, they give some character to the world, and the Egg Carrier theme is an absolute banger. On the other hand, I feel that for a game so tied to narrative, they could either be better integrated or somewhat streamlined. For example, in Sonic's story, Sonic is pursuing Zero carrying Amy through the city. However, upon completing Speed Highway, you just get put back on the adventure field with no context for what to do next. You just have to wander around until you trigger the cutscene in the casino area. I think it would have made more sense to have the cutscene happen right after finishing Speed Highway. Having to wander around Station Square for a minute really doesn't add anything gameplay or narrative-wise. I recognize, of course, that having hub levels was in vogue for platformers at the time, between things like Mario 64, Banjo-Kazooie, and Spyro the Dragon, but those games are generally less linear and narrative-driven than Sonic Adventure is, so they're more suited to hub levels. It does mean that there's some fun secrets and upgrades hidden on the adventure fields, and it forms the basis for the mission mode. Also, side note for the upgrades, most of them suck. A distressing number of them are literally only useful once in the whole game, like the Ancient Light for Sonic, which you find right next to the door you use it to open, and which is too impractical to actually use against the game's enemies because of how slow it is. Probably the most useful one is Gamma's Hover. Anyway, let's actually run through each character's gameplay. Sonic is my favorite character to play in this game. He feels very satisfying to control in a vacuum. Of particular note is how fun and responsive the spin dash is in this game. You can blast through some of the stages with it, and you'll need it in order to get the A ranks on some of Sonic's levels. A lot of Sonic's 3D game moveset is already fully formed here. The homing attack is present, and much better than it would be in the later games where they decided to make the homing attack bad. Here, it gives you a nice startup on momentum. This is all nice, but there is a bit of a problem. Like I said, Sonic feels great to control in a vacuum, but the level design sometimes has trouble supporting that. This game loves really narrow corridors, which aren't great for maintaining momentum. I'm not one of those people who believes that Sonic has to be all about speed all the time. There's been elements of precision platforming in Sonic games from the very start. However, there are times where you can tell the game wants you to go fast, but it's difficult to do so because of how narrow the space is. This is something that they would improve in Sonic Adventure 2, as we'll see. Sonic's levels are mostly straightforward races to the finish, barring the odd exception of Casinopolis, the pinball stage. Sonic also visits more stages than any other characters. Sonic gets 10 action stages, where the most other characters get is 5. I think this is for the best. His gameplay is the most fun. Sonic gets 2 totally unique boss fights, first against Chaos Zero at the beginning of the game, and then against the Egg Viper at the end. Chaos Zero is largely a tutorial fight, but also serves to showcase the game's ambition. If a game is willing to start with a boss fight, it's telling you it's putting narrative front and center. Egg Viper is a great fight too. It's very climactic, and I still sometimes die on it. It's also interesting to me that Sonic's stages have more of the flavor of 2D Sonic than almost any other part of the 3D games. It's the only 3D Sonic game, as far as I can recall, that has Tails following Sonic around for a lot of his stages, and most of Sonic's levels follow a sort of act structure, where they introduce a gameplay and music change partway through. It is funny how sometimes it feels like the areas you traverse as Sonic don't really fit his gameplay style, but it makes more sense when you remember that Sonic isn't the only character but shares these stages with others. Traversing these areas at least increases verisimilitude. Speaking of traversing the same areas, what is Tails' gameplay like? Tails is all about the chase. Tails plays the closest to Sonic of all the characters, which makes sense. The difference is that in each of Tails' levels, the goal is to beat another character to the finish line. Tails' gameplay is pretty similar to Sonic's, except that he has no spin dash, and instead of the homing attack, Tails does his traditional flying. This makes him distinct compared to Sonic, which is nice. The problem with Tails' gameplay, in my view, is how similar his levels are to Sonic. They're basically shorter chunks of Sonic's levels that are made pretty easy because of Tails' ability to fly, and all of the boost rings that Tails can use to get ahead of his opponents. It feels almost like an easy mode, especially because you can go find an upgrade that makes Tails fly faster before you have to play even a single level. There's also some pacing issues in Tails' game. Tails' story starts with 2 normal stages, but then you get to Tails' version of Ice Cap, which is only the snowboarding. Then you get to a boss fight, and then 3 more minigames. First is Sky Chase again, then Sandhill, which is the snowboarding again, and then the second Sky Chase, right in a row. At least Tails gets his time travel cutscene and a few other interesting cutscenes in the middle of this section, so that breaks this all up at least. But that's a lot of those things right in a row, especially when Sky Chase isn't even fun. Ever wanted to listen to this sound a lot? It does make sense from a character and story standpoint, at least. Tails' story is all about learning to be your own person independent of your idols, and mostly doing so by snowboarding and flying planes. I wish I could go snowboarding and fly planes. Maybe someday. On the whole, I don't mind Tails' story. I wish it was a bit longer, and that more of his levels weren't gimmicky. I appreciate that even though the different stages are reused between characters, they are at least recontextualized with different gameplay. This will come back when we discuss Sonic Heroes and Shadow the Hedgehog. Wink. Tails' unique boss fight is his final boss, the Egg Walker. It's really dang easy, and not worthy of the final boss theme of Sonic's game if I'm honest. Next, of course, is Knuckles. Knuckles gets 5 stages, each of which involves searching for pieces of the shattered Master Emerald. When playing as Sonic, you often come across weirdly open areas that don't fit Sonic's gameplay super well. These areas are usually where Knuckles' levels take place. Knuckles' first stage takes place in the open area that appears at the end of Sonic's version of Speed Highway, for example, and his second involves going into areas of Casinopolis that Sonic never visits. Again, this recontextualization is a lot of fun. Knuckles' gameplay is necessarily slower and more exploration-driven than Sonic's, so the fact that his levels are on the same maps as Sonic's and still work pretty well is impressive. They would abandon this idea in Sonic Adventure 2 by giving each character unique stages, but it's admirable how well it works here. Knuckles has a radar that tells him how close he is to each of the 3 emerald pieces in each stage. Emeralds can be out in the open, inside enemies, or buried underground. It's a little irritating how finicky the digging is, because it requires you to hit jump and the other button at the same time. This game does everything on just 2 buttons, which is odd because it's never been on a console that required so few. Having dig on a 3rd button would be nice, but I digress. Knuckles is also satisfying to move around with. When he lands, he maintains the momentum he had while gliding, which makes it easy and fun to run around the stages with him. The one flaw with Knuckles' gameplay is that attacking with him feels kind of awkward. They gave Sonic the homing attack to compensate for how much more awkward jumping on enemies is here than it is in 2D, but Tails and Knuckles got no such luck. Knuckles punches, obviously, and he can glide into enemies. Unfortunately, Knuckles is nailed to the floor while punching, which makes it a little unsatisfying to use. On the whole, though, Knuckles' gameplay is pretty fun, and mercifully not too difficult. Knuckles' unique boss fight is a fight with Chaos 2, a form of the character that no other character gets a chance to deal with, on a completely unique hotel ballroom map. Neat. Amy's story is weird. For one thing, it's short, with only 3 action stages and 1 boss fight. It's also even more different than Sonic's gameplay-wise. Amy doesn't spin like Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles, so she primarily attacks with her big hammer. The hammer is halfway satisfying to use. I would like it better if using it while grounded didn't absolutely glue Amy's feet to the floor. The time you're stuck in the animation for using the hammer isn't really proportional to how long the attack is active either. Luckily, though, the jumping attack is very satisfying to use. Amy has a lot of air control, and the animation for her jumping attack is quick. You can see from my footage that it was my primary method of attacking during Amy's playthrough. Amy also builds momentum differently from other characters. She builds it much slower than Sonic and Tails, for example, but she does get faster with time just like they do. She can also hit the attack button once she's at a full run to use her hammer like a pole vault and gain a lot of momentum. And she'll need it, too. Amy's levels are all about evading an Eggman robot called Zero. Zero pretty persistently chases you through each of Amy's stages, but it's more of a nuisance than anything. It's stunned for a really long time by being hit by Amy's hammer, so basically as long as you whack it when it appears, it's not a problem. Amy's levels involve more puzzle solving than other characters, such as finding and placing boxes in Hot Shelter, and having to pick the right door in Final Egg. Having to do all that while also having Zero pressuring you adds more tension to it than it might have otherwise. At the end of the campaign, Amy gets her only boss fight against Zero, which was very satisfying after having had to deal with him, at least when I was a kid and had any trouble with Amy's very easy story at all. Amy's story is fun, but I wish it was longer and more of a challenge. It only took me 45 minutes, and that was with stops at the Chow Garden. I'm sure I've done it even faster in the past. Only 2 left, y'all. We're almost done with the gameplay roundup, I promise. E102 Gamma's gameplay is another step away from Sonic's. E102 primarily attacks by using a tracking laser to lock on and then firing projectiles at enemies. Like I said, I played Sonic Adventure 2 before this game, so when I first tried Gamma's gameplay, my immediate thought was, oh, it's like the mech levels from that game. Sort of. Unlike in Sonic Adventure 2, Gamma's health is governed by rings like any other character, and his timer ticks down instead of up like it does for every other character. Gamma gains additional time by destroying enemies, and the more enemies you lock onto and destroy at once, the better your time bonus will be. This gives Gamma's levels some of the sense of speed, or at least the tension of the faster characters. He is also a very satisfying character to control. Gamma walks at a speedy clip despite his size, and his jump is long and keeps his momentum. The one flaw in Gamma's control scheme is that using his hover can have a tendency to stop your momentum. Also, Gamma automatically hovers over water, so good luck interacting with your Chow in the garden if they're in the water. Oh well. Gamma gets a lot of mini-bosses in his 5 stages. All of Gamma's bosses are the other E-Series robots, whose boss fights are essentially the same except for fights against E105 Zeta and the rematch against Beta Mark II at the end of the story. Side note, in Sonic Heroes we encounter E123 Omega, the last of the E-Series robots, and it really annoys me that Eggman chose to start the series with a robot named Beta. I think the implication is supposed to be that Zero from Amy's story is the first one in this series, but he's never referred to as Alpha. Very irritating. Anyway, Gamma's levels are always one of the highlights of this game for me. I usually wind up playing him before Big, despite Big coming before him on the character select screen. And speaking of which, Big is the last of Sonic Adventure's playable characters. Well, technically Gamma is last on the character select screen, but I'm presenting them in the order that I played their stories when getting the footage for this video. Big is a cat who loves nothing more than vibing and fishing. At the beginning of his story, his best friend Froggy accidentally swallows Chaos's tail and becomes possessed by it. So Big spends his whole story pursuing the strange frog with a tail to try and bring him home again. Yes, Sonic Adventure infamously includes not just a fishing minigame, but a whole fishing storyline, which makes up roughly an eighth of the game's stages. This is a strange choice. I assumed that in the Dreamcast version you were supposed to use the Dreamcast fishing controller for these sections. I suppose that as a launch title they wanted to show off as many console features as possible, and so fishing was included for that reason. However, I later learned that the Dreamcast fishing controller isn't even compatible with the game. I thought that the DX version had been kneecapped due to the lack of the proper controller, but no, this is just how it's supposed to work. Bizarre. I've never actually played a video game dedicated to fishing, but I have played many of the ubiquitous fishing minigames included in other games. Big's fishing feels unintuitive compared to those. The goal is always to fish for and catch Froggy on each of Big's 4 stages, but the controls leave a little to be desired. You don't have a lot of fine control over your lure once it's in the water, meaning you have to rely on just getting a good cast right in front of Froggy's cold, uncaring eyes. Also, there is absolutely no way to move the camera while it's focused on your lure in the water, despite being able to rotate the camera with the shoulder buttons at almost any point in the game otherwise. This game comes from before the right stick controlling the camera became standard, and indeed originates on a platform that had no right stick. But it's very frustrating that the camera breaks the rules during the one time it would be most helpful to be able to look around. Once you actually find Froggy, all you have to do is flick the stick when he nibbles on the line, and then reel him in. Once you've got him, it's actually extremely easy to reel him in as long as you don't pull too hard, too fast, and break the line. Big actually loses a life if he breaks the line, which is very funny. Imagine getting so mad that a fish got away that you die instantly. Anyway, once you figure out where Froggy is, it's usually a very short process to reel him in and finish the stage. The game doesn't do a super great job of explaining the fishing mechanics though, meaning I had to work primarily through dumb luck to win at these stages until literally 2021, when I finally figured it out. Now I have the opposite problem of Big's story being way too easy. The water in Big's stages is full of other fish to catch, but there's really no reason to go for anything but Froggy unless you absolutely adore the fishing or going for 100% completion. Also, at the end of Big Story, he has a boss fight where he has to fish Froggy out of Chaos 6, which is both hilarious and adorable. Weird inclusion in this game. I feel that Big's presence in this game means people speak about it with a more jocular tone than they might otherwise, for better or for worse. I actually decided as part of this video to get every emblem in both of these two games for the first time ever. Despite having played these games for most of my life, I have never actually done that. I decided I wanted to finally get a complete view of them by doing so here. In Sonic Adventure 1, you get emblems for completing each level with each character as part of the story. In addition, each level has 2 additional missions. For most characters, this involves finishing the level with 50 rings and then beating a specific time to finish the stage. This is often where the jank of this game becomes a real issue. Sonic Adventure has never been jank-free, but I feel that I've encountered more jank while playing for this video than in every previous playthrough of this game combined. Part of that is due to completion, and therefore spending more time with it. But it's probably also in part due to playing the PC version. If you buy Sonic Adventure DX on Steam, the version you're getting is a port of a port of a port of a port, so this is definitely to be expected. I encountered physics glitches I'd never seen before. You can see how poorly this version of the game handles Skydeck's tilting mechanic, for example. Many times when landing on an animal capsule, I would slide off the side, even when landing squarely on top, particularly in Final Egg. When doing Tails' Speed Highway for completion, the camera somehow got stuck outside the tunnel that Tails was running through and then glitched Tails himself outside of it to his death. Interesting. Sometimes completing the timed challenges for Sonic's emblems almost felt like hoping for good jank RNG, rather than just running through cleanly. Despite this, Sonic and Tails' Emerald challenges were really fun. I enjoyed optimizing each stage as Sonic to try and get the best time. Some of the time requirements are pretty stringent, so it made it quite a challenge. Tails' third emblem on each stage involves racing a faster version of his opponent, which is a lot of fun and reintroduces some of the challenge that these levels had for me when I was a kid. Amy's timed challenges, unfortunately, are too easy to be interesting, at least for me. Gammas are really fun because they require you to play the levels as efficiently as possible and make combos to go for big time bonuses, which I found a lot of fun. This just leaves Knuckles and Big. Knuckles' timed challenges involve finding all 3 pieces of the Master Emerald on the stage in less than 1 minute. This is not easy, but doable on smaller stages like Speed Highway or Casinopolis, but frankly unreasonable on larger ones like Red Mountain or Lost World. At least on Skydeck, they give you 2 minutes. I took to cheesing Knuckles' levels. I would try and find a piece, and if I found it in reasonable time, I would take all the time I needed to find the next one. Then once I found it, I wouldn't collect it, but instead would restart from the pause menu. When you restart a Knuckles stage, it drops you back at the last Emerald piece you collected, with the amount of time on the timer you had then. Therefore, you can go and collect the Emerald piece you just found and keep your good time. I cheesed these Knuckles levels because I have no idea how they could be done legitimately aside from dumb luck. I'd rather not spend all day hoping to succeed, I'd rather just do it. That only leaves Big's completion challenges. Big's gameplay is obviously not well suited to timed challenges or ring collecting, so his emeralds require catching a fish of a certain weight before catching Froggy. First you have to catch one that's 1,000 grams and then one that's 2,000. Let's just say I have some issues with this. First of all, it's frustrating that catching a 2,000 gram fish and then Froggy won't count for both emblems, meaning you have to play each stage at least 3 times for 100% completion. This applies to all characters too, by the way. Secondly, there is no way to know how much a fish weighs until you either catch it or it breaks your line. I see no reason why it should tell you when it gets away, except for spite on behalf of the developers. It feels mocking. The large fish you need to catch in order to obtain Big's emblems fight you way harder than Froggy ever does as well. Not only do you have to engage with the fishing in order to get 100% completion, you have to get good at it. But I did it, because I wanted to have the most complete experience possible of this game. And of course, I couldn't do that without heading over to the Chao Garden. Naturally, no discussion of the Sonic Adventure games would be complete without discussing raising Chao. Chao are one of the main draws to these two games for a lot of people. I want to primarily discuss Chao raising when I get to Sonic Adventure 2, so I'll discuss its specifics in this game. The idea feels half-baked here and would be better expanded upon in the second game. For starters, all there is to do with the Chao in this game is Chao racing, and both it and the shop can only be accessed from the Station Square Chao Garden. And the Station Square Garden is the least interesting of the 3 visually. It makes the other 2 gardens feel superfluous. I wanted to save my Chow raising for Sonic Adventure 2, because that was where I did all my Chow raising as a kid, but I did for the sake of completeness. My primary Chow I named Jelly, because I was listening to a Jacob Geller video when I started raising Chow. So at first I thought Gelly, and then it was like, Jelly, that's cute. I put a pot on Jelly's head, which caused him to glitch wildly all over the screen. So sorry that's in my footage. I love Jelly. He's God's perfect glitchy little racer. Chow racing can be a bit irritating in this game because it feels a bit random. The ability to encourage your Chow feels pretty vague. Chow will occasionally get sparkles, and at that moment you can hit the button for a boost. The problem is that the camera focuses on whichever Chow has the sparkles, so you have to move the stick to get the camera back to your own Chow. Not only that, but changing the camera's focus doesn't just make it cut, it causes this really sickening camera move. Having to scroll past all the other Chow back to your own makes it look like someone's throttling the camera operator. I spent a lot of time raising Jelly up to be fast enough to win the emblem races, to the point where I had obtained every other emblem before I got the Chow emblems. But at last, I was done with completion. Well, sort of. There's also the game's mission mode, which was added in the DX version of the game. In this mode, you find various missions scattered around the adventure fields and accomplish them. This mode is weird and annoying and gives you nothing for completing it, and the mission prompts feel really vague and sometimes poorly translated, such as referring to the carousel on Twinkle Park as a wooden horse. It doesn't even grant emblems, so the only reason to do it is if you want the Steam achievement on PC. Also, what do you get for getting all 130 emblems? You unlock the ability to play as Metal Sonic on Sonic stages, which is pretty rad in my opinion. It's a fun little victory lap to revisit the best parts of the game. We're almost done with Sonic Adventure 1 now, I promise. Last up, it's story time, babes. I'm going to attempt to relay the whole narrative in chronological order so we can discuss it. At some point before the game begins, Eggman learns about the ancient being Chaos, who once destroyed the world. Naturally, he seeks it out. Chaos is within the Master Emerald, so Eggman shatters it. Angel Island falls into the ocean and Knuckles goes out to repair the Master Emerald. Chaos goes to Big's house looking for the Chaos Emerald there. Froggy swallows Chaos's tail and the Chaos Emerald and becomes possessed by it, leading Big to begin searching for Froggy. At some point, Gamma is constructed and begins serving in Eggman's fleet. Chaos appears in Station Square, where Sonic kicks its butt. The next day, Tails is testing a new plane powered by Chaos Emeralds, but crashes it and is rescued by Sonic. They go to Tails' lab, where Eggman appears and loses a fight. However, he does steal their Chaos Emerald and reveal his entire plan of letting Chaos absorb the emeralds to grow stronger. Big fishes for Froggy in Twinkle Park and Ice Cap, and Knuckles looks for emerald pieces in Speed Highway. Sonic and Tails start looking for Chaos Emeralds, but Eggman steals one outside Casinopolis. He gives it to Chaos, Knuckles fights Chaos too, and then Eggman tricks Knuckles into thinking that Sonic has the Master Emerald pieces. Knuckles believes him for some reason, leading him to fight Sonic and collide perfectly with him so that he drops the emeralds, which are then picked up by Eggman and given to Chaos. Chaos becomes Chaos 4. Eggman escapes to the egg carrier and Sonic and Tails chase him. The tornado gets blown out of the sky and Sonic and Tails are separated. Sonic meets Amy, who gets kidnapped by Zero. He chases Zero through Twinkle Park and Speed Highway, before re-encountering Tails on the Tornado 2. Meanwhile, Tails was finding a new Chaos Emerald to power the plane. Gamma steals Froggy from Big on Emerald Coast. Aboard the egg carrier, Sonic and Tails pursue Eggman. Eggman orders Gamma to take the bird that Amy is protecting, but she refuses, and Gamma begins to doubt Eggman. Eggman now has 6 Chaos Emeralds, including the one that Froggy swallowed and the one that Amy's bird was carrying. Big fishes Froggy out of Chaos 6, and then Sonic kicks its ass. Everyone escapes the crashing egg carrier. Knuckles goes to the crashed egg carrier to find the last of the emerald pieces, Amy goes to find her bird's lost family, and Gamma goes to rescue his E-Series brothers. Tails stops Eggman from goddarn nuking Station Square and defeats him on his own. Sonic learns about the origins of Chaos in Lost World, and then invades Eggman's base at Final Egg for a last confrontation. Chaos steals the emerald embedded in the Tornado 2, and then takes the other 6 from Knuckles, who had them after restoring the Master Emerald. Now perfect Chaos, he destroys Station Square. The spirit of Tikal, Chaos' old friend, appears to Sonic and urges him to seal Chaos back in the Master Emerald. Sonic uses the Chaos Emeralds to become Super Sonic and fights Perfect Chaos. Chaos turns good again after getting its butt kicked by Sonic, and it and Tikal move on to the next life. Sonic chases after Eggman into the sunset. And that's your credits. Yeah, it's kind of a lot. To me, Gamma's story on its own is a highlight. Gamma's first sight is Eggman, who describes himself as Gamma's father. After putting Gamma through an introductory training session, Eggman immediately pits him against his older brother Beta. Eggman openly expects Beta to win the fight and is shocked when Gamma wins instead. He also tells Gamma to his face that Beta is going to be scrapped as a result of his failure. Next, Eggman assigns Gamma, Delta, Epsilon, and Zeta to find Froggy. Gamma succeeds, and Eggman exiles his siblings seemingly out of spite. After conversing with Amy and trying to get the bird from her, Gamma starts to doubt Eggman, and even more so after Amy saves Gamma from being destroyed by Sonic. Gamma spends the rest of his story saving the animals within the rest of his E-Series siblings, before eventually releasing the bird contained within himself and dying in the process. Gamma's story is the most moving one in the game, centering on how Gamma's been abused, how he unlearns what his abuser taught him, and how he redeems himself and his brother. Redemption is a pretty constant theme in these two games, as we'll see. Other characters get some arcs, although more subtle. Tails' arc primarily revolves around him learning to define himself outside of being Sonic's friend, and becoming a hero in his own right. Knuckles learns more about the history of the Echidnas, and gains greater appreciation for his role as guardian of the Master Emerald. Amy's barely a character. Her two things are that she be shopping and she loves Sonic, but at least she gets to have a fun little side story in the game, and her scenes with Gamma are quite sweet. I sometimes wonder if I would have transitioned sooner if I had consumed more stories as a young child that had better written female characters. Instead, I got Amy Rose and Princess Peach and the like. Big the Cat is Big the Cat. Surprisingly, aside from Big, the character who changes the least in their story is Sonic himself. He's really the same person at the beginning of the story that he is at the end. One of the flaws of being the main character of a franchise like this is that Sonic has to be cool at all times, so he can't change much as a character between the opening and closing credits. The other character who gets a big redemption is Chaos. Chaos was originally a mutant Chao who protected the Chaos Emeralds and the Master Emerald, and developed a friendship with Tikal. However, the rest of the Echidnas, including Tikal's father Pachacamac, wanted the emeralds for themselves, and burned the shrine and attacked the Chao and Tikal to get them. Chaos went wild and absorbed the Chaos Emeralds, becoming perfect chaos and destroying the Echidna civilization, before being sealed in the Master Emerald by Tikal, whose soul is trapped in the emerald with Chaos. Chaos has only known mortals to be evil aside from Tikal, so it uses Eggman to get at the Chaos Emeralds again. Eventually, it does so on its own after Sonic and Knuckles beat Chaos 6. Tikal finally appears to the Sonic gang after Perfect Chaos destroys Station Square, and tells the crew that Chaos needs to be sealed up again. Instead, Sonic goes super and kicks Chaos to the curb. In the game's words, this turns Chaos good again, and it ascends to the next life with Tikal. I think it would have been a stronger choice narratively if Super Sonic was merely keeping Chaos from running any more rampant, while Tikal was talking it down. I think this would have made more sense than just having the game say, Chaos is good now. It would also nicely mirror Gamma's redemption scenes. Of the redemption scenes we see in the Sonic Adventure duology, this one is the weakest. Sonic Adventure is certainly a game. Earlier I said that it has a lot going on. I would describe it as maximalist, if that makes sense. Between 6 different gameplay styles, the adventure fields, the subgames, Chao, mission mode, and emblem collecting, sometimes it feels half done. They really tried to get everything in there, and it winds up being a bit much. Regardless, I still enjoy this game quite a bit, although I recognize that a lot of that is nostalgia. I legitimately have no idea whether I would be recommending this game to you if I hadn't played it as a child. My history with it has inoculated me to its issues. Sonic Adventure 2, on the other hand, absolutely rules. I will 0% apologize for my view that Sonic Adventure 2 is, quote, good, actually, end quote. It is certainly one of the best video game sequels ever, if you're using the yardstick of improvement over the previous installment. There is literally only a single thing that is worse in Sonic Adventure 2 compared to Sonic Adventure 1. We will get there, I promise. I want to approach my critique of Sonic Adventure 2 differently than I did for the first game, because it makes more sense to do it this way. Rather than splitting its storyline across 6 individual characters like the first game, this one splits its cast into 2 teams of 3, and cuts the types of stages in half from 6 to 3 as well. Therefore, I'm going to blast through the 2 stories and give thoughts and critiques on various topics as we go. Sonic Adventure 2 is better organized than its predecessor, so it lends itself better to this kind of rundown. We begin, as all good stories do, with evading the police. Sonic has been picked up by the cops for reasons he doesn't understand, but breaks out of the helicopter and escapes through the town while being pursued. First off, starting City Escape's music with just the bass line and then having the rest of the instrumentation hit as soon as Sonic hits the ground is absolutely inspired, and in my opinion, one of the all-time great video game music moments. Secondly, Sonic feels even better to control in this game than he did in the first. He feels more responsive and gets going faster, and the levels are more polished in such a way that you don't get stuck on terrain or bounce off walls as often as you did in the first. This is the first game where Sonic can grind on rails, which has since become a core part of his moveset in the 3D Sonic games because it was so much fun here. There's also a better sense of speed here than there is in the first. When you get going in this game, you're going. At the end of this stage, Sonic fights a big police robot and then encounters Shadow, another hedgehog who is Juliet's hero from the ages of 6 to about 10. Shadow's stolen a Chaos Emerald, and the cops, because they're stupid, have mistaken him for Sonic and arrested him. Cops are terrible in the Sonic world, too. This is the most ACAB Sonic game. Sonic himself says so when he says,
"Sheesh, there always seems to be a lot of police around when you don't need them."
Anyway, Sonic gets arrested. Meanwhile, Rouge is trying to take the Master Emerald from Knuckles, and then so does Eggman, so Knuckles destroys it to prevent its theft. First of all, cool, another female Sonic character. Granted, she's obsessed with jewelry as her primary character trait, but at least she's a cool jewelry thief. Second of all, the Master Emerald being destroyed means that the emerald hunting stages are back to being Knuckles' form of gameplay once again. This time, since characters don't share stages, each character's levels have a soundtrack suited to that character. Knuckles gets a relaxed hip-hop vibe. I like all of these tracks, but I wish the vocals were higher in the mix because they're pretty hard to make out as is. My favorite Knuckles music track is Aquatic Mine. It's chill lo-fi beats to hunt for the Master Emerald to. Knuckles' first stage is Wild Canyon, the first of many Egyptian-themed levels in this game. A combination of playing this and watching Yu-Gi-Oh! As a child probably had a lot to do with why I had an Egyptology phase that transitioned into a fascination with history generally. Anyway, this is where the one thing the second game does worse than the first comes in, because the Emerald Radar only pings for one emerald shard at a time. There are several times in my footage where I was practically right on top of an emerald piece, but didn't notice because the game had decided that I wasn't supposed to find that one first. It makes it a lot more frustrating to find the pieces. Luckily, Wild Canyon is a pretty small stage, so it's not too bad. Next up is Tails, who's flying to Prison Island to break Sonic out after his arrest. I am realizing literally now at 26 that they put Sonic in Guantanamo Bay, or at least that's the vibe I'm getting. Tails scares Eggman away from Amy, who is at Guantanamo Bay to try and help free Sonic. Then we get Prison Lane, and an introduction to this game's mech gameplay. It's a slower speed variation on Gamma's levels from Sonic Adventure 1. You can still build up combos, but you no longer have a timer, and you have a health bar instead of having life governed by rings. It's different. I like the frantic feel of Gamma's levels, but these are a bit slower paced and set more apart from the other playstyles, so that's also an advantage. Tails' levels have upbeat instrumental pop rock, at a slower tempo than Sonic gets. My favorite Tails stage theme is Mission Street. It's the most upbeat track to ever accompany a police chase. Amy breaks Sonic out of Guantanamo Bay, and he escapes through Metal Harbor. Metal Harbor rocks. It's faster than City Escape, and features an amazing track with a wonderful horn line and some great lyrical guitar work. After escaping Guantanamo, Sonic encounters Shadow in the jungle, and they fight. Eggman calls Shadow on Discord to tell him that they've rigged the whole island of Cuba to explode. I know it's not textually Cuba, but I'm saying that it is because it's funny. This game spoils you by giving you 2 amazing Sonic stages in a row, because next up is Green Forest. Its track is faster paced and darker than Metal Harbor to reflect the higher stakes, and you're actually under an 8-minute timer. This used to stress me out when I was little, but this level's extremely finishable in that time frame. Cuba gets exploded. I guess Eggman wasn't a big fan of Castro. Eggman's CIA? I will return to this theory someday. Knuckles continues to hunt for the Master Emerald at Pumpkin Hill, so you can listen to its banging tune. Knuckles' plotline will intersect with the other heroes eventually, I promise. Here's where the other issue with this game's treasure hunting gameplay starts to emerge. These levels are too damn big. This level's primarily empty space, very frustrating. Eggman uses the Eclipse Cannon to blow a hole in the moon in what has become an infamous scene online. Tails has to evade the cops in Mission Street. Knuckles emerges from the sewers into the plot, literally. He does aquatic mine and then just happens to come up out of the sewer right in front of Tails and Amy. Our heroes need to figure out where Eggman is broadcasting from, even though we saw him shoot a laser from the space colony Ark. So Tails tails the President of the United States because he's Skyping with Eggman in the presidential limo. This is where the game introduces one of its few minigames, kart racing. It's pretty fun. However, if you approach the presidential limo going that fast, you would probably be turned into chunky salsa by all the Secret Service bullets coming at you from different directions. Anyway, Sonic and Tails interrupt the president's Discord call with Eggman to find Eggman's IP address, and go to Eggman's base in Egypt on the hunch that he'll have a spacecraft capable of taking them to the Ark there. The next 3 stages are all about breaking into Eggman's Egyptian base. Tails storms the outer area, and Sonic clears out the inside, and then Knuckles searches for the keys into the base. Both Sonic and Knuckles get new upgrades at this point, the bounce bracelet and the hammer gloves respectively. After these 3 stages, Knuckles shockingly confirms that the afterlife is real by fighting a ghost, a fact that is never brought up again. And then Sonic fights the Egg Golem, a huge Egyptian pharaoh statue that Eggman has converted into a weapon. Team Sonic steals an actual US space shuttle that Eggman has in his pyramid base, and use it to travel to the Ark. On the way, all of the Master Emerald pieces fall out of the space shuttle. Oops. Team Sonic's plan is to use a fake Chaos Emerald that Tails created to short out the Eclipse Cannon before it can fire. Tails goes to disable the power supply in Eternal Engine, while Sonic goes to put the fake emerald in the Eclipse Cannon. However, Eggman takes Amy hostage, forcing Sonic to return. Time for Knuckles to interrupt the plot again. His last stage is now, and it's Meteor Herd. Meteor Herd sucks. It's way, way, way too big for what you've been asked to do on it. At least the track is a banger. After this, we get the boss fight against Rouge, and the Master Emerald is restored. Knuckles and Rouge establish the will-they, won't-they dynamic they'll have for the rest of the series. I like this cutscene a lot, but I wish that Meteor Herd came before Eternal Engine, so that we didn't get the hostage situation being interrupted. It's a little silly the way they did it. Anyway, back to Sonic's plot. Sonic has to rush back to rescue Amy through the stage Crazy Gadget. This stage has the gimmick of changing the direction that gravity goes, which is really fun. The last room of the stage was super difficult to me as a kid. I remember being stuck on it for a while. I even remember that either one of my brother's friends or a babysitter, I can't remember which, had me borrow their memory card to beat this stage for them when I was a kid. Good times. After this stage, Eggman has Amy at gunpoint and has Sonic lay down the fake emerald before trapping him in a glass capsule and launching him into space. Eggman is scary in this scene. It's probably the most malicious he gets in the entire franchise. Sonic has the fake emerald in the capsule with him, but it explodes, apparently killing him. Tails has to fight Eggman alone. A few things on this. I wish that the part of this scene that implies Sonic survives came after this boss fight instead of before, so that we could stew in his potential death a little longer. My other note is that this is the exact same story that Tails had in the last game. In both games, the climax of Tails' story is having to fight Eggman alone after the apparent death of Sonic. Feels like kind of a rehash is all. Also, this boss fight sucks. In the final encounters with the other story's characters, they use multiplayer exclusive abilities against you. In the case of Eggman and Tails, this includes the Power Laser, which lasts forever and does ridiculous damage. You can literally get comboed to death by it. After dealing with that, it's back to Sonic. Final Rush, Sonic's last stage, owns. It's really fast and involves a lot of rail grinding. Excellent stage, excellent track, great cap-off to hero story. Finally, it's time to fight Shadow. In the last encounter, you're both running forward constantly. I feel that this prefigures a lot of later Sonic boss fights in games like Unleashed, Colors, and Generations, which also often feature a constantly running Sonic fighting a boss. There's some DNA of that here. Anyway, in Team Hero's ending, Sonic destroys the Eclipse Cannon and gives a big grinning thumbs up to the camera. However, there's another perspective that we haven't seen yet. Of course, this game famously has a dark story as well. Both of them take place at once and give context to scenes from the other. Dark Story begins with Eggman breaking into Prison Island in his mech to look for the military's top secret weapon. Stage 1 is Iron Gate. A few notes here. Eggman's gameplay is the same as Tails's, and his levels have music similar to Tails's but darker and more atmospheric. appropriate for the Sinister equivalent. Rather than reusing same levels and recontextualizing them like Sonic Adventure 1 does, Dark Story has different levels that use similar assets and areas. Iron Gate, for example, uses the same aesthetic as Tails' level Prison Lane, but makes it darker and spookier. I was totally smitten with the idea of playing the villain when I played this game as a 6-year-old. This was the first game I played, as far as I know, where you could play as a villain, aside from playing Bowser or Wario and Mario spin-off games. It was neat to me. I also love how the lady on the intercom gets more and more upset as you get deeper and deeper into the base. After this stage, Eggman releases Shadow from containment, and Shadow tells him to meet him on the Space Colony Ark. Meanwhile, the exact same scene plays out between Rouge and Knuckles. Rouge's levels obviously play out like Knuckles'. Her first stage is Dry Lagoon, which, despite its name, is like Wild Canyon but full of water and plant life. Rouge's music is a funkier vibe, with a lot of mallet percussion, winds, electric piano, and female vocals. It's a bit like the soundtrack to a 60s spy movie, appropriate for a government agent like Rouge. Rouge's music walks so that the Bayonetta soundtrack could run. After Dry Lagoon, Eggman gets past the government into his own hideout in Sand Ocean, a nighttime riff on Hidden Base. Finally, it's time to control Shadow, who's evading the cops after stealing a Chaos Emerald from the Federal Reserve. That's not a bit. They name-drop the Federal Reserve in this game.
We interrupt this broadcast for an important news flash. There has been a break-in at the Federal Reserve Bank today.
Anyway, Radical Highway rips. Shadow's music tracks are very 2000s emo rock, again with lyrics so low in the mix and distorted that they're impossible to make out. Oh well, they still rock hard. Radical Highway borrows the aesthetic of Mission Street, and it always made sense to me to have Sonic characters run on big roads like this. It's a natural fit. At the end of the stage, we get the same scene where Sonic and Shadow meet for the first time, and Sonic gets arrested. Rouge follows Eggman to his Egyptian base and searches for keys inside, much like in Death Chamber. Egg Quarters is even more similar to its hero counterpart than most of these stages. Eggman goes to meet Shadow at the center of the Ark, which has not yet been reactivated, so it's very dark and spooky. Lost Colony is probably the spookiest this game gets. Yes, spookier than the Ghost Boss fight. Shadow shows Eggman the Eclipse Cannon, which is powered by Chaos Emeralds, and Rouge asks to join their squad as a double agent and provides a third emerald. The Dark Team goes to Prison Island to steal 3 more emeralds. Eggman causes a distraction by blowing a bunch of stuff up on Weapons Bed, a riff on Metal Harbor. Rouge breaks in, sets an explosive charge, and then grabs the 3 Chaos Emeralds. This is Security Hall, a stage infamous for having a 5-minute timer. Of the many stages that I got stuck on as a child in this game, this was the one I was stuck on the longest. Upon completion, Rouge gets trapped in the base, and Shadow is forced to rush to free her. This leads to Shadow's White Jungle, a rainy and foggy variant on Green Forest. After a run-in with Sonic, Shadow and Rouge escape the island before its destruction. Eggman does something to the moon, but the cannon isn't powerful enough yet. They need the last Chaos Emerald. In one of the few callbacks to Sonic Adventure 1, Tails was given the yellow Chaos Emerald, also known as the Piss Diamond, as thanks for saving Station Square from Eggman's nuke in the last game. Rouge tails Tails on the highway, and then Shadow does the same on Skyrail, which is Pumpkin Hill but during the day and therefore 1000% less spooky. Eggman tries to use the Egg Golem on Sonic, but Sonic beats it and now Eggman has to fight it. Rouge gets Eggman to give her his password incredibly easily and sees the prototype of the ultimate life form, and then completely ignores both that revelation and the fact that Sonic and Tails have infiltrated the Ark to go find the last pieces of the Master Emerald. This ushers in Rouge's equivalent of Meteor Herd, which is called Mad Space. This is the peak of the problems with the treasure hunting stages in this game, because it's gigantic and empty, and the hints are backwards or written in opposites. The hint thing isn't actually that difficult, it's just annoying. After that nightmare, you get the same confrontation between Rouge and Knuckles that you got in Hero Story. Eggman has already figured out Sonic and Tails' plan like the absolute king he is, so he goes to confront Sonic and Tails.
Now is the time to end this long drawn-out battle. Place in history as the ultimate genius.
Me uploading a YouTube video. Eggman's last level is Cosmic Wall, which rules. It's got a low gravity thing going on, and tons of enemies around to target and build up huge combos. That's the great joy of the mech levels, in my opinion. Last up, we get the Tails boss fight in the other direction. Shadow finally figures out that Rouge is a government agent, and she tells him about the prototype ultimate life form. Eggman can tell that someone is trying to stop the cannon, so Shadow goes to intercept. Shadow's last stage is Final Chase, which is like Final Rush if Final Rush was bad. It's based around these spinning gravity cylinders, which are really janky. You often fall off of them or just get stuck in odd spots, and you spin around them way too fast. I don't mind gravity mechanics, but this is no Super Mario Galaxy. Lastly, of course, you get the Sonic vs. Shadow boss fight in the other direction, and Eggman manages to grab the real Piss Diamond and put it in the Eclipse Cannon. However, we're not done yet. Putting all 7 emeralds in the cannon triggers a sequence put in place by Gerald Robotnik. Gerald has programmed the Ark to impact the Earth, shattering it and killing everyone, out of revenge for the death of Maria, Shadow's only friend and his granddaughter. This makes her Eggman's cousin or sister, a fact that goes entirely unremarked upon. Anyway, the Ark is crashing into Earth, and this makes the humans very upset. I enjoy the shots we get of the humans on Earth, including from Jerusalem, Egypt, what seems to be Italy, and one shot of the world's most French-looking man literally standing in front of the Arc de Triomphe. All of the playable characters except Shadow team up to stop the energy from the Chaos Emeralds. The final stage is Cannon's Core, where each of the 5 characters gets a turn. Tails and Eggman's segments are basically Eternal Engine Part 2, with the additional mechanic of these little time stop switches. After that, Rouge and Knuckles get a turn. Their section is a lot of swimming and puzzle solving, and gives an idea of how their movesets might work on a linear level. Last up is Sonic, whose section even includes a reference to Lost World from Sonic Adventure 1. Shadow is convinced that the Earth is doomed, but Amy convinces him to help and also triggers his memories of Maria, who wanted Shadow to help the people of Earth be happy. Shadow goes to help. The Bio Lizard, the prototype for Shadow, appears, and Shadow fights it so Knuckles and Sonic can stop the Chaos Emeralds. I struggled so much with the Bio Lizard boss fight as a little girl, so whipping its ass as a grown-up woman is super cathartic for me. Even after Knuckles stops the Chaos Emeralds, the Bio Lizard attaches itself to the colony and continues to drive it towards Earth. Sonic and Shadow turn super and fight the Bio Lizard, which the game now pragmatically refers to as the final hazard. After killing it, the colony is still on a collision course with Earth, so Sonic and Shadow use Chaos Control to put it back into its orbit. Shadow falls out of Earth's orbit and apparently dies. That's how the duology ends, with the characters, even Eggman, standing together on the Space Colony Ark in memorial of him. Sonic quietly leaves and says goodbye to Shadow, and the credits roll. There's your story. Shadow's story in this game is actually kind of beautiful in my opinion. There's a running theme of redemption in the Sonic Adventure duology, between Gamma and Chaos in the last game, and Shadow in this one. Shadow wants to carry out Professor Gerald's plan out of revenge. The game shows you early on that Shadow views what he's doing as a vengeance for Maria. It's notable that his flashback at the start of the game cuts off before Maria can finish her sentence, implying that Shadow is selectively remembering the moment in order to justify his thirst for vengeance. Later, he starts to soften up a bit when he goes to save Rouge after being reminded that he failed to save Maria. Then, in the end, after talking to Amy, he finally remembers that Maria asked not for vengeance, but for Shadow to help the people of Earth be happy. This is his moment of redemption, and feels more earned than Chaos's redemption at the end of Sonic Adventure 1. It's also interesting that Amy is key to both Gamma's and Shadow's redemption arcs. In the Sonic franchise, women be shopping, and they also be accessories to male characters' redemption arcs. I'm going to talk about the gender politics of Sonic games, and you cannot stop me. I mostly love the story in this game, though. It's very camp. I mean, you've heard some of the snippets of dialogue here and there. Honestly, my love of camp may have originated with this game. We'll be hearing more about camp in my second Sonic video, which will be my next upload. Like with the first game, I decided to get every emblem in this game. That means getting all 5 emblems on each stage, doing Chow Racing and Chow Karate, doing the boss rushes, doing the kart racing, and getting A ranks on every mission in the game. This is a lot of work, more so than Sonic Adventure 1. It requires that you play each stage at least 5 times. Every stage's second mission is to get 100 rings, which is usually pretty easy. The third is to find the Lost Chow, which is done via optional upgrades and extra platforming challenges, which is fun. The last 2 are where it starts to get difficult. In the 4th mission, you start having to do time trials. To get an A rank on these levels, you usually have to meet the same score requirement as the first mission. Normally this is not that much of an issue, as the best way to get A ranks anyway is to go quickly for a large time bonus. The last mission of each level is a hard mode variant on the original. For treasure hunters, this means that each emerald is hidden even more obtusely than before, usually in a place that requires careful movement and optional upgrades to reach. I always thought that Tails' sunglasses and Rouge's treasure scope were mostly useless when I was a little girl, but now I recognize that they're primarily for these levels. How anyone was supposed to figure them out without being able to look them up on YouTube is beyond me. I actually enjoy the speed stage hard modes, because their remixed enemy layouts and obstacles were a great new challenge. In all my years playing this game, I had never really dug into them, so it was a new and refreshing way to experience this game. The real problem is the mech stage hard modes. The enemies on these stages fire so much faster than before, and the homing missiles that are your primary attack in these levels are too slow to compensate, so you often get practically stun-locked to death. And God help you if you try to A-rank these stages. But we'll get back to that later. In the meantime, let's talk about Chow again. This game's Chow raising mechanics are drastically improved from the first. For starters, the Chow Garden isn't nearly as out of the way. Each stage has a few Chow crates that give you a Chow key. If you have it, you'll go to the Chow Garden after you complete the stage. You can also access the Chow Garden straight from the Stage Select menu. From Chow World, you can reach the Chow Garden and the Chow Kindergarten. You still have the Black Market from before, with the notable improvement that you can buy 5 items at once instead of just 1. I raised 2 Chow in this game. Chow can now mature into either Hero or Dark Chows, depending on which character raised them. My Hero Chow was Timmy, and my Dark Chow was Abby. Once you reach Hero or Dark Chow status, you also gain access to the Hero and Dark Gardens. I remember spending hours and hours at the Dark Garden when I was a kid, because as a little girl I was edgy, and I'm still edgy now. The Dark Garden is absolutely my aesthetic. However, it's objectively worse than the Hero Garden, because the fruit here gives less stamina experience across the board comparatively. Extremely irritating. Chow Racing is back, and it's better than it was in the first game. The camera stays focused on your Chow instead of going bonkers, and mashing buttons to encourage your Chow has a much more obvious effect than in the first game. It's much better. The other Chow activity in this game is Chow Karate, which is cool in theory. It would be great if you had any influence over it whatsoever, aside from the stats of your Chow. You can encourage them if their zeal gets low, but aside from that it's entirely numbers in RNG. I'll be honest with you. I love raising Chow. They're cute and fun, and I love watching numbers go up. However, both of the activities for Chow in this game are no fun in my opinion. Chow Racing still has annoying RNG with all of the tripping, and you have to do 25 races to even get out of the beginner league and earn a single emblem. Chow Karate takes forever, and you have so little influence over it. It's irritating. And speaking of irritating, I have another confession to make. I wound up giving up on doing the emblem completion. The level that finally got me was Cosmic Wall's Hard Mode mission. It requires a score of 100,000 points for the A rank, which requires more or less perfection. You have to get perfect combos, avoid getting hit, and even finish fast enough to get a bit of time bonus in. I spent all afternoon one Sunday trying to finish it with an A rank and getting increasingly frustrated. I was banging my head against the wall on this level for hours before I eventually tweeted my frustration. I twet, I am never going to 100% Sonic Adventure 2 again after doing it for this video. Getting some of these A ranks is absolutely miserable. Someone very important to me replied, you don't have to if it's that miserable. When I was doing the beginning part of Sonic Adventure 2, actually playing the story and raising Chow, I was having a wonderful time. It was very nostalgic in a healthy way. I'm getting farther along in my social transition now as I write this. I'm starting to pass a bit better, and I've also found my style, which makes me very happy. But unfortunately, this means that I am now feminine enough in appearance that I am starting to attract male attention when I go out. This has made going out a lot scarier and less enjoyable in the short term. I am starting to get over it a bit, but it's not great. Sonic Adventure 2 was a source of great comfort at first, in these moments. I had this thing that I could curl up with and feel safe. But the longer I spent on these tiresome completion challenges, the more it felt like a chore and a crutch rather than something I was doing for my own enjoyment. Yes, I was doing it for the video, but these videos are just as much for me as anyone else. and this was starting to become an unhealthy way of avoiding going out or developing myself in other ways. So I stopped. I thought at first that I might write at the end of the Sonic Adventure 2 discussion about how I learned something by overcoming the difficulty of these challenges, but not really. I wasn't getting anything out of the A ranks aside from an excuse to stay afraid of the outside world, so I quit. Not every difficult video game thing has a neat video essay ready point. This isn't Zero Ranger or Returnal or something. It's the A ranks in Sonic Adventure 2. Sometimes it's just not fun and you do it to yourself anyway. My recommendation is that you try some of these extra missions, but avoid going for the A ranks unless you're absolutely desperate for the completion stuff. On the whole, do I recommend this game? Yes, absolutely. I have always and will always love Sonic Adventure 2. It opened me up when I was young to so much of what games could be, even if it wasn't always exactly perfect. It gave me some great memories and even led me to making some friends that I might not have had otherwise. I earnestly think it would be useless for me to try and be objective and judge this game as, quote, good or bad, since it's so deeply embedded in my brain, so I simply present it to you. I told you a whole lot about it. Please try it for yourself if it sounds fun, but I will always believe in my heart that this game is good, actually, period. For what it's worth. That's all for today. Thanks for watching and consider subscribing. Till next time, ciao! I've come to make an announcement. Shadow the Hedgehog's a bitch-ass motherfucker. He pissed on my fucking wife. That's right, he took his hedgehog fucking quilly dick out and he pissed on my fucking wife and he said his dick was this big. And I said, that's disgusting. So I'm making a call-out post on my twitter.com. Shadow the Hedgehog, you got a small dick. It's the size of this walnut, except way smaller. And guess what? Here's what my dong looks like. That's right, baby. All points, no quills, no pillows. Look at that, it looks like 2 balls and a bong. He fucked my wife, so guess what? I'm gonna fuck the earth. That's right, this is what you get. My super laser piss. Except I'm not gonna piss on the earth. I'm gonna go higher. I'm pissing on the moon. How do you like that, Obama? I pissed on the moon, you idiot. You have 23 hours until the piss droplets hit the fucking earth. Now get out of my fucking sight before I piss on you too.